The first tear hit the dusty wooden floor with a sound only she could hear. Katherine Evans knelt alone in the back of the small church, the setting sun casting long shadows through the stained glass windows, painting her grief in shades of amber and crimson. Her hands trembled as they clutched the simple gold band she'd never have the chance to wear. Her wedding day turned to ash by a cruel twist of fate. Sweetwater Creek, Colorado Territory, 1876, a town that had promised her a new beginning now seemed to mock her sorrow. The church door creaked open behind her, but Katherine didn't turn. She had no interest in well-meaning townspeople or their pitying glances. But the footsteps that approached were heavy, deliberate, accompanied by the gentle jingle of spurs against wood. "You're not kneeling alone anymore," came a deep voice, gentle despite its roughness. Katherine lifted her tear-stained face to find Garrett Calloway standing beside her, his hat held respectfully in his calloused hands. Dust from the trail still clung to his denim and leather, and his dark hair fell in untamed waves around a face weathered by sun and wind. His eyes, however, held something she hadn't seen from anyone else in town, not pity, but understanding. "I don't need company in my misery, mister." "Calloway," she whispered, her voice hoarse from hours of crying. "Maybe not," he said, kneeling down beside her anyway, his tall frame folding awkwardly on the hard church floor. "But sometimes the Lord works in ways we don't expect." Katherine clutched the ring tighter in her palm. "The Lord took James away 3 days before our wedding. I don't think I'm interested in his ways right now." Garrett didn't flinch at her bitterness. Instead, he nodded slowly, his gaze fixed on the altar before them. "Lost my wife and child to fever 2 years back. Spent more hours than I can count kneeling just like you are now, asking why. Did you ever get an answer?" she asked, curiosity momentarily breaking through her grief. "Not the one I wanted," he admitted, "but I learned something about carrying pain. It's a mighty heavy load for one person." Katherine turned away, wiping angrily at her tears. "I'm leaving Sweetwater as soon as I can arrange passage back east. There's nothing for me here now. The stage won't be through for another week," Garrett said quietly. "In the meantime, Mrs. Wilson at the boarding house mentioned you might need work. I could use help at my ranch, just temporary, of course." "I'm a schoolteacher, Mr. Calloway, not a ranch hand." A smile flickered briefly across his face. "My sister left her 3 children in my care when she went to Denver to tend our ailing father. They're running wild without any proper schooling. Could use someone who knows their letters." Katherine opened her mouth to refuse, then paused. The money from teaching his nieces and nephews could help fund her journey back to Boston, and perhaps keeping busy would ease the constant ache in her chest. "1 week," she said finally. "Then I'm leaving on that stage." "Fair enough," Garrett replied, rising to his feet and offering her his hand. "The rocking sea isn't much, but it's peaceful. Might be what you need right now." Katherine hesitated before placing her small hand in his. His palm was rough with calluses, but his grip was gentle as he helped her to her feet. For a fleeting moment, she felt anchored by his strength, a temporary respite from the storm of grief that had been threatening to drown her. "I'll collect my things and meet you out front," she said, tucking the gold band into her pocket. "Take your time," Garrett replied, settling his hat back on his head. "Some hurts can't be rushed." Katherine watched him walk toward the church doors, his shoulders broad beneath his worn leather vest. She had no intention of staying in this territory any longer than necessary, and certainly no desire to form attachments to anyone or anything here. But as she gathered her prayer book and shawl, she couldn't help but feel the faintest flicker of curiosity about the quiet cowboy who had knelt beside her in her darkest moment. The ride to the rocking sea ranch stretched longer than Katherine had anticipated. The borrowed mare beneath her plodded steadily along the dusty trail, while Garrett rode a few paces ahead on his dappled gray gelding. The silence between them was broken only by the rhythmic creaking of leather and the occasional call of a hawk circling overhead. Katherine's thoughts drifted back to the life she'd planned with James. They had met at a literary society in Boston, their shared love of poetry forming the foundation of their courtship. When he'd proposed a move west to establish a new life in the expanding territories, she had agreed with romantic notions of adventure. Now those dreams felt like bitter mockery. "We'll be crossing Sweetwater Creek up ahead," Garrett called over his shoulder, interrupting her thoughts. "It's running high with the spring melt, but it's safe enough if we take it slow." Katherine nodded, though he had already turned away. As they approached the creek, she saw what he meant. The normally gentle stream had swollen into a rushing torrent, golden with silt and frothing white over submerged rocks. "Stay close," Garrett instructed, guiding his horse into the water. "Follow my path exactly." Katherine tightened her grip on the reins, anxiety rising in her throat as her mare stepped cautiously into the current. The water swirled around the horse's legs, reaching halfway up its chest at the deepest point. She felt her skirts growing heavy with water, but kept her focus on Garrett's broad back ahead of her. Suddenly, her mare stumbled on a slippery rock, lurching sideways. Katherine gasped, losing her balance. For a terrifying moment, she was falling, the cold water rushing up to meet her, and then strong arms caught her, pulling her against a solid chest. Garrett had somehow dismounted his own horse and waded back to catch her before she could be swept downstream. "I've got you," he said, his voice steady despite the rushing water. "Hold on to me." Katherine clutched at his shoulders, mortified by her helplessness but grateful for his quick action. He carried her the rest of the way across the creek, setting her gently on the opposite bank before returning for both horses. "I'm sorry," she managed once they were both safely across, water dripping from her sodden clothes. "I should have been more careful." Garrett shook his head, wringing water from his hat. "Creek's running stronger than I expected. Should have warned you better." He rummaged in his saddlebag and pulled out a worn but clean blanket. "Wrap this around you. Can't have you catching your death before you even meet the children." Katherine accepted the blanket gratefully, suddenly aware of how she must look, hair falling from its neat arrangement, dress clinging to her shivering form. "Thank you, Mr. Calloway." "Garrett," he corrected, meeting her eyes briefly before looking away. "If you're going to be living under my roof for a week, reckon we can dispense with formalities." "Katherine," she offered in return, feeling oddly vulnerable as she spoke her name. A hint of a smile touched his lips. "Ranch is just over that rise. We'll have you dry and warm soon enough." As they crested the hill, the rocking sea came into view, a sturdy two-story house of timber and stone, flanked by a barn, corral, and several smaller outbuildings. It wasn't grand by Eastern standards, but there was something welcoming about the curl of smoke from the chimney and the neat vegetable garden to one side. "Uncle Garrett." 3 children burst from the house, racing toward them with unbridled enthusiasm. The oldest appeared to be around 10, a girl with dark braids flying behind her, followed by a boy of perhaps 8 and a smaller girl who couldn't have been more than 6. Garrett dismounted, catching the youngest child as she launched herself into his arms. "Hello, troublemakers." "Been behaving for Mrs. Potter, we tried," said the oldest girl, her eyes moving curiously to Katherine. "Is this our new teacher?" "This is Miss Evans," Garrett confirmed. "She'll be staying with us for a while." "Miss Evans, these hooligans are my sister's children, Abigail, Samuel, and little Emma." Katherine managed a smile despite her damp discomfort. "It's lovely to meet you all." Emma peered at her with undisguised interest. "Why are you all wet?" "Miss Evans took an unexpected swim," Garrett explained, setting Emma down. "Abby, go ask Mrs. Potter to prepare a hot bath for our guest. Sam, take care of the horses." The children scampered to obey, and Katherine found herself being ushered into the house by Garrett's gentle hand at her elbow. The interior was simpler than she was accustomed to, but clean and well kept, with polished wooden floors and sturdy furniture. A plump, gray-haired woman emerged from what appeared to be the kitchen, wiping flour-covered hands on her apron. "Mrs. Potter, this is Miss Evans," Garrett introduced them. "She'll be staying in the spare room and teaching the children while she's here." "Heavens, child, you're soaked through," Mrs. Potter exclaimed. "Come along, I'll show you to your room and get that bath ready." "Can't have you catching pneumonia your first day here." Katherine followed the housekeeper up a narrow staircase, aware of Garrett's gaze following her. Despite her exhaustion and lingering grief, she found herself wondering what had brought him to offer help to a stranger crying in a church. There was kindness in his weathered face that seemed at odds with his rugged exterior. The small bedroom Mrs. Potter showed her to was simple but comfortable, with a patchwork quilt on the bed and lace curtains framing a window that overlooked the distant mountains. It was Garrett's sister's room before she left, Mrs. Potter explained as she bustled about, lighting lamps against the gathering dusk. Martha always did keep it nice. Now you get out of those wet things and I'll have the bath brought up. Dinner's in an hour, but don't you worry if you need more time to settle in. When the older woman had left, Katherine sank onto the edge of the bed, suddenly overcome by the day's events. This morning, she had been lost in grief in an empty church, certain her life held nothing but sorrow. Now she found herself in a stranger's home, surrounded by children and unexpected kindness. She removed the gold band from her pocket, looking at it in the fading light. James was still gone. That pain hadn't lessened. But for the first time since receiving news of his accident at the mine, she felt something besides grief, a tiny spark of curiosity about what tomorrow might bring. Katherine's first official day as teacher to the Calloway children began early. The sound of a rooster's crow and the distant lowing of cattle pulled her from a surprisingly deep sleep, the first uninterrupted rest she'd had since James's death. For a moment, disorientation washed over her as she took in the unfamiliar room with its simple furnishings and the scent of pine drifting through the half-open window. Reality returned quickly enough. She was at the Rocking Sea Ranch, temporarily employed by Garrett Calloway to teach his nieces and nephew. In 1 week, the stage would arrive and she would return to Boston, leaving this unexpected detour behind. She dressed in one of her 2 remaining clean dresses, a practical navy blue with white trim, and pinned her hair in a simple knot at the nape of her neck. The looking glass revealed dark circles beneath her eyes, but the swelling from yesterday's tears had subsided. Downstairs, she found the kitchen alive with activity. Mrs. Potter stood at the stove, turning bacon in a cast-iron skillet while all 3 children sat at the large oak table, their faces scrubbed clean and their hair neatly combed. Of Garrett, there was no sign. "Good morning, Miss Evans." Emma called out cheerfully, swinging her legs beneath the table. "Mr. Calloway said to tell you he's gone to check the north pasture fence," Mrs. Potter explained, setting a cup of steaming coffee at an empty place. "He'll be back by midday. Said you could use the front parlor for schooling if you like." Katherine nodded, taking the offered seat. "Thank you, Mrs. Potter. That sounds perfect." Breakfast was a lively affair, with the children peppering her with questions about Boston and what she planned to teach them. Katherine found herself warming to their enthusiasm despite her initial reservations. "Our ma taught us our letters before she left," Abigail informed her proudly. "I can read whole chapters from the Bible now." "That's excellent," Katherine replied. "Perhaps you can demonstrate after breakfast." Samuel, quieter than his sisters but with an observant gaze, asked, "Will you teach us about geography, Miss Evans? Uncle Garrett has a big map, but he doesn't know all the places on it." "I certainly will," Katherine promised. "And mathematics, literature, and natural sciences, too." "What's literature?" Emma asked, stumbling over the word. Katherine smiled. "Stories, poems, plays, words that help us understand the world and ourselves." After breakfast, Katherine established the front parlor as their temporary classroom. A wooden table served as a desk, and Mrs. Potter provided slates, chalk, and a few precious books from the small shelf in Garrett's study. The morning passed quickly as Katherine assessed each child's abilities. Abigail was indeed an accomplished reader for her age, while Samuel showed a natural aptitude for numbers. Little Emma struggled with both, but displayed a remarkable memory for facts once they were presented to her. By midday, Katherine had established a teaching plan that would challenge each child appropriately during her brief tenure. They were deep in a lesson about the major rivers of America when the front door opened, and Garrett entered, bringing with him the sense of open air and leather. The children momentarily forgot their studies, rushing to greet their uncle with tales of their morning accomplishments. "Miss Evans says I have a mathematical mind," Samuel informed him proudly. Garrett's gaze moved from his nephew to Katherine, a smile crinkling the corners of his eyes. "Is that so? Might make a better rancher of him than I thought." "All three are quick learners," Katherine said, surprised by how easily the praise came. "You should be proud of them." "Their mother would be," he replied, a shadow briefly crossing his features. "Martha always put store in education, not much opportunity for it out here, though." "Well, they shall have as much as I can provide in a week," Katherine assured him. Garrett nodded his thanks. "Mrs. Potter has dinner ready. Thought afterward, if you're willing, I might show you and the children the rest of the ranch. Been promising to take them fishing at the pond, and it's a fine day for it." Katherine hesitated. Her intention had been to keep emotional distance during her stay, focusing solely on teaching before departing. Yet the hopeful looks on the children's faces made refusal difficult. "I'm not much of an angler," she admitted. Garrett's smile deepened, revealing a dimple in his right cheek she hadn't noticed before. "Neither was I, till necessity taught me. I reckon you'll catch on quick." After a simple but hearty meal of beef stew and fresh bread, they set out on foot toward a small pond nestled in a grove of aspens about a quarter-mile from the house. Samuel carried the fishing poles proudly, while Abigail and Emma collected wildflowers along the path. Garrett walked beside Katherine, occasionally pointing out features of his land. "My father claimed this section back in '58, he explained. "Started with nothing but a one-room cabin and a handful of cattle, built it up year by year." "It's beautiful country," Katherine acknowledged, taking in the sweeping vistas of mountains and prairie. "Different from Massachusetts, but there's a grandeur to it." "What was your home like back east?" Garrett asked. Katherine thought of the neat row house in Boston where she'd grown up, with its polished banisters and bay windows overlooking cobblestone streets. Smaller, more confined, but comfortable. "My father was a professor at the university. Our home was always full of books and ideas." "Must be quite a change coming west." "It was meant to be an adventure," she said softly, the familiar ache returning. "James, my fiancé, he had dreams of starting a mercantile business in Sweetwater, said the territories needed educated people to help them grow." Garrett was quiet for a moment. "I'm sorry about your loss, Katherine, truly." The genuine sympathy in his voice touched her. "Thank you, it still doesn't feel real sometimes." "It won't for a while," he said. "When I lost Caroline and our baby, there were days I'd wake up reaching for her, convinced it had all been a bad dream." Katherine glanced at him, struck by the raw honesty in his admission. "Does it ever stop hurting?" "Not entirely," he admitted. "But eventually, you start having moments when the good memories bring more comfort than pain." They reached the pond before Katherine could respond. It was a charming spot, the water clear and still, reflecting the blue sky and surrounding trees like a mirror. Garrett busied himself showing the children how to bait their hooks with the worms Samuel had dug up that morning. "Your turn, Miss Evans," Garrett said, offering her a fishing pole. Katherine eyed the wiggling worm with distaste. "Perhaps I'll just observe first." A laugh rumbled from Garrett's chest. "City folk," he teased, but there was no malice in it. "Here, I'll help you." Before she could protest, he was standing behind her, his arms around her as he guided her hands on the pole. His chest was warm against her back, his breath stirring the loose strands of hair near her ear as he explained how to cast the line. Katherine found herself acutely aware of his proximity, of the strength in his hands as they enveloped hers. "Now, just like I showed you," he murmured, helping her swing the line out over the water. The baited hook landed with a satisfying plop, sending ripples across the pond's surface. "Well done," Garrett said, stepping back. "Now comes the hard part, patience." The afternoon stretched pleasantly as they fished, the children's excited whispers whenever their lines bobbed, creating a cheerful atmosphere. Katherine surprised herself by catching 2 small trout, earning admiring glances from the children and a warm smile from Garrett. As the sun began its descent toward the western peaks, casting long shadows across the water, Katherine found herself relaxing in a way she hadn't since arriving in Colorado. The children's laughter, the gentle rustling of aspen leaves, and Garrett's occasional quiet observations about the wildlife around them created a peaceful tableau that soothed her raw emotions. When it was time to return to the ranch, Emma insisted on walking beside Katherine, slipping her small hand trustingly into hers. "Uncle Garrett smiles more when you're around," the child observed innocently. Katherine felt a blush warm her cheeks. "Does he? I hadn't noticed." Emma nodded solemnly. "Mama says his heart got broken when Aunt Caroline died. Maybe you can fix it." "Emma," Garrett called from ahead, having apparently overheard, "don't pester Miss Evans with such nonsense." "It's not nonsense," Emma protested. "Mama said—" "That's enough, little one," Garrett interrupted, his expression unreadable in the fading light. "Run ahead and help Samuel with the fishing poles." After the children had scampered off, an awkward silence fell between them. Katherine searched for something to say that would ease the tension. "They're wonderful children," she offered finally. "Your sister must miss them terribly." Garrett nodded, his gaze fixed on the path ahead. "Martha had no choice but to go to Denver. Our father's health is failing, and there was no one else to tend him. The children couldn't travel with her. The city's no place for them, especially with sickness in the house. It was kind of you to take them in." "They're family," he said simply, as if that explained everything. After a moment he added, "I'm sorry about Emma. Children have no filter between their thoughts and tongues." "There's no need to apologize," Katherine assured him. "She meant well." They walked in silence for several paces before Garrett spoke again, his voice low. "I don't expect my heart to be fixed, as Emma put it. Some breaks change you permanently, but I've made peace with that." Katherine thought of the gold band she still kept in her pocket, a talisman of what might have been. "I'm not sure I'll ever find that peace." "You will," Garrett said with quiet certainty. "You're stronger than you know, Katherine Evans." Something in the way he said her name made her heart flutter unexpectedly. She glanced at him, but his expression had returned to its usual reserved calm, giving no hint of his thoughts. As they approached the ranch house, the lamps already lit within casting a warm glow through the windows, Katherine found herself wondering what it would be like to belong to a place like this, to have roots in this wild, beautiful land, to be part of the family that made the rocking sea more than just a collection of buildings. But such thoughts were dangerous fantasies. In 5 days, she would board the eastbound stage and leave Colorado territory behind. This brief interlude at the rocking sea was nothing more than that, an interlude, before she returned to the life that awaited her in Boston, however empty it might now seem. The next few days fell into a rhythm that Katherine found unexpectedly comforting. Mornings were devoted to lessons with the children, their eager minds absorbing knowledge like thirsty ground takes rain. Afternoons often included practical applications of their studies, botany lessons during walks through the meadows, mathematics while helping Mrs. Potter measure ingredients for baking, geography as they traced the paths of rivers on Garrett's maps. Garrett himself was frequently absent during daylight hours, the demands of running the ranch keeping him in the saddle from dawn until dusk. But he made a point of joining them for evening meals, listening intently as the children recounted their learning achievements and offering thoughtful questions that showed genuine interest in their progress. Katherine found herself watching him during these family gatherings, noting the gentle patience he showed with Emma's rambling stories, the firm but fair way he addressed Samuel's occasional rebellious streak, and the respect with which he treated Abigail's growing maturity. For a man who had never fathered children of his own, he displayed a natural talent for nurturing their development. On the 4th day of her stay, Katherine was helping Mrs. Potter hang laundry in the yard when she noticed dark clouds building over the western mountains. The air had grown heavy with the promise of rain, and a cool breeze had replaced the earlier warmth of the spring day. "Storm's coming," Mrs. Potter observed, pinning a sheet to the line with practiced efficiency. "Best get everything inside before it hits." They worked quickly, gathering the dry laundry and bringing in what hadn't yet dried. As Katherine helped fold the children's garments in the kitchen, a crash of thunder shook the windows, followed almost immediately by the drumming of heavy rain on the roof. "Garrett's still out checking the herd in the south pasture," Mrs. Potter fretted, peering anxiously out the window at the darkening sky. "Should have been back by now." Katherine felt an unexpected surge of concern. "Will he be all right?" "Oh, that man's weathered worse storms than this, Mrs. Potter assured her, though her worried glance toward the window belied her confident words. "But I don't like the look of that lightning." As if summoned by her words, a brilliant flash illuminated the yard, followed by a deafening crack of thunder that sent the children running into the kitchen, wide-eyed with a mixture of fear and excitement. "Where's Uncle Garrett?" Samuel demanded, his usual bravado diminished. "He'll be back soon," Katherine said, trying to project a calmness she didn't entirely feel. "In the meantime, why don't we review our lesson on weather patterns? This is a perfect example of a spring thunderstorm." Her attempt at distraction worked only partially. The children participated in the impromptu science lesson, but their eyes kept straying to the windows, watching for any sign of their uncle's return. An hour passed, and the storm showed no signs of abating. If anything, it had intensified, the rain now coming down in sheets that obscured the view beyond the porch. Mrs. Potter had prepared dinner, but no one felt much like eating with Garrett still absent. "I'm going to look for him," Samuel announced suddenly, pushing back from the table. "You most certainly are not, young man," Mrs. Potter replied firmly. "Your uncle would tan my hide if I let you out in this weather." "But he could be hurt," the boy protested. "What if lightning got spooked and threw him?" "Samuel Thornton, you sit yourself back down," Mrs. Potter ordered. "Your uncle has been riding these lands since before you were born. He knows how to handle himself in a storm." The boy subsided reluctantly, but Katherine could see the worry etched on his young face. It mirrored her own growing concern. Though she had known Garrett for only a few days, the thought of him injured and alone in the deluge caused an ache in her chest that surprised her with its intensity. Another hour crawled by. The children had been sent to bed despite their protests, though Katherine doubted they were sleeping. She sat in the kitchen with Mrs. Potter, who knitted steadily by lamplight, the click of her needles punctuating the continued roar of the storm. "He's been gone too long," Katherine finally said, voicing the fear that hung in the room. Mrs. Potter's needles paused. "Yes," she admitted quietly. "He has. Could someone ride out to look for him?" Katherine asked. "One of the ranch hands, perhaps? They're all out at the line shack on the North Range," Mrs. Potter explained. "Won't be back till tomorrow." Katherine rose from her chair, a decision forming. "Then I'll go. You, Mrs. Potter looked at her in astonishment. "Miss Evans, you're not equipped for such a thing. You barely know the property." "I know he went to the south pasture," Katherine said, already moving toward the coat rack where her shawl hung. "And I'm a competent rider. I can follow the main trail." "It's pitch black out there, girl," Mrs. Potter protested. "You'll get yourself lost or worse." Katherine paused, recognizing the truth in the older woman's words. She wasn't familiar enough with the ranch to navigate it in darkness and driving rain. But the thought of Garrett lying injured somewhere, with no one coming to his aid, was unbearable. Before she could formulate a new plan, the back door burst open with a gust of wind and rain. Garrett stood in the doorway, drenched to the skin, his hat pulled low over his eyes and water streaming from his slicker. "Good heavens," Mrs. Potter exclaimed, rushing to close the door behind him. "We were about to send out a search party." "Sorry to worry you," Garrett said, removing his hat and shaking water from it. "Creek was running too high to cross, had to take the long way around." His eyes found Katherine's, noting her position by the coat rack and the obvious relief on her face. "Were you going somewhere, Miss Evans?" Katherine felt heat rise to her cheeks. "I was concerned," she admitted. "We all were." Something softened in his expression. "I appreciate that, but I'd never forgive myself if you'd gone out in this weather on my account." Mrs. Potter bustled around him, taking his wet coat and hat. "There's stew keeping warm on the stove. You need to get into dry clothes before you catch your death." "The children?" he asked, glancing toward the stairs. "In bed, but likely awake and waiting for the sound of your return," Katherine told him. They were quite worried. "I'll look in on them after I change," he promised, heading for the stairs. He paused as he passed Katherine, his voice dropping so that only she could hear. "It means a lot that you were willing to come looking for me." Before she could respond, he continued up the stairs, leaving a trail of rainwater in his wake. Katherine stood motionless, trying to understand the flutter in her chest at his words. She had been genuinely concerned for his safety, Yes, but her reaction seemed disproportionate to their brief acquaintance. Mrs. Potter's knowing gaze made her uncomfortable. "I'll prepare some tea," Catherine said, moving toward the stove to occupy herself with this simple task. "He's a good man," the housekeeper observed casually as she wiped rainwater from the floor. "Best I've known, aside from my late husband. I'm sure he is," Catherine replied neutrally. "Not many men would take in their sister's children without complaint or treat a hired housekeeper like family," Mrs. Potter continued, "or offer shelter to a grieving stranger." Catherine focused intently on measuring tea leaves. "Mr. Calloway has been very kind." "Kindness is common enough," the older woman said. "What Garrett has is rarer integrity right down to his bones." Before Catherine could formulate a response, footsteps on the stairs announced Garrett's return. He had changed into dry clothes, his hair still damp but combed back from his forehead. He looked tired but relieved to be home. "Children are asleep," he reported, taking a seat at the table. "Or pretending to be, at least." Mrs. Potter placed a bowl of stew before him. "Eat, then you can tell us what kept you out in that deluge." As Garrett ate, he explained how he'd found several cattle stranded on a rise as the normally docile creek transformed into a raging torrent. "Couldn't leave them to drown," he said simply. "By the time I got them to higher ground, the main crossing was impassable. Had to ride 5 miles upstream to find a safe passage. You risked your life for a few head of cattle," Catherine couldn't help asking. Garrett looked up at her, his expression serious. "Those animals depend on me. It's my responsibility to protect what's in my care." There was something in his words that resonated deeply with Catherine. In the few days she'd known him, she'd observed how seriously Garrett took his responsibilities to his land, his animals, his family, even to her as a guest in his home, Mrs. Potter excused herself shortly after, leaving Catherine and Garrett alone in the kitchen. The storm continued outside, but its fury had diminished somewhat, the thunder now a distant rumble rather than the earlier deafening crashes. "You should get some rest," Catherine suggested, noting the fatigue evident in his posture. "It's been a long day." "In a moment," he replied, his gaze steady on her face. "Mrs. Potter mentioned you were about to come looking for me." Catherine smoothed her skirt, embarrassed by her impulsive decision. "It was foolish. I don't know the property well enough to have been any help." "It wasn't foolish," Garrett said quietly. "It was brave, misguided perhaps, but brave nonetheless." "I was worried," she admitted. "The children were frightened, and when you didn't return. I'm sorry for causing you concern." He hesitated, then added, "It's been a while since anyone worried about my welfare. It's not unpleasant." The vulnerability in his admission touched her. "I'm sure your sister worries about you." "Martha has enough on her plate with our father's illness," he said. "And the children, well, they're young enough to believe their uncle is invincible." "No one is invincible," Catherine said softly. "No," he agreed, his eyes holding hers. "We all have our breaking points." Something passed between them in that moment, an understanding that went beyond words. They were two people who had experienced profound loss, who carried grief as a constant companion. Yet somehow, in acknowledging that shared burden, it seemed lighter. Garrett broke the connection first, rising from his chair with a soft groan. "I should let you get some sleep. Tomorrow's your last full day of teaching before the stage arrives." The reminder of her impending departure fell between them like a physical barrier. Catherine had almost forgotten in the routine of the past days that her time at the rocking sea was temporary. "Yes," she said, her voice suddenly hollow. "The children have made remarkable progress. I've written out some lessons for them to continue with after I'm gone." Garrett nodded, his expression guarded once more. "They'll miss you. We all will." He left before she could respond, his footsteps receding up the stairs. Catherine remained in the kitchen, listening to the rain against the windows and the occasional rumble of distant thunder. For the first time since arriving at the rocking sea, she found herself questioning her decision to return east. Boston held nothing for her now except memories her parents had passed years ago. And with James gone, there was only a teaching position at a girls' academy awaiting her. A respectable life, but a lonely one here at the rocking sea. She had found unexpected connections with the eager children who absorbed her lessons, with kind-hearted Mrs. Potter, and with Garrett, whose quiet strength and integrity had begun to heal something in her that she'd thought permanently broken, but was a few days' acquaintance enough to base such a momentous decision upon. And even if she stayed in Sweetwater, what place could there be for her beyond this temporary arrangement? Katherine twisted the gold band on her finger James's ring, which she'd taken to wearing on a chain around her neck. She had promised to love him, to build a life with him in this territory. Though death had released her from those vows, she still felt bound by the commitment she had made. Yet, as she finally climbed the stairs to her room, she couldn't help wondering if perhaps James had led her west for a purpose neither of them could have foreseen. Not to be his wife, but to find a different path, one that might still lead to happiness, albeit in a way she never expected. Katherine's final day at the rocking sea dawned clear and bright, the storm having washed the world clean. She woke early, determined to make her last lessons with the children especially meaningful. After breakfast, she presented each child with a small gift: a journal for Abigail to practice her writing, a book of mathematical puzzles for Samuel, and a collection of simple poems for Emma. "These are to continue your studies after I leave," she explained as they examined their presents with delight. "Education doesn't stop when the teacher goes away." "But why do you have to go?" Emma asked, her lower lip trembling slightly. "Don't you like us?" Katherine knelt before the little girl, taking her small hands in her own. "I like you very much, Emma, all of you, but I have responsibilities back in Boston." "What responsibilities?" Samuel demanded, his tone challenging. "Uncle Garrett says you don't have family there anymore." Katherine glanced up, surprised to find Garrett standing in the doorway of the parlor, watching the scene with an unreadable expression. How long had he been there? "There are different kinds of responsibilities, Samuel," she said, turning back to the boy. "I made promises about the work I would do there. Couldn't you make new promises here?" Abigail asked quietly. "Uncle Garrett says a person can always choose a different path if the first one doesn't lead where they thought." Katherine's eyes returned to Garrett, who looked somewhat embarrassed at having his philosophy quoted back to him. "Your uncle is a wise man," she said carefully, "but some decisions require careful thought." The morning's lessons proceeded with a bittersweet quality, the children trying extra hard to impress her while simultaneously growing more subdued as the hours passed. By lunchtime, even the normally ebullient Emma had fallen quiet, picking at her food rather than chattering as usual. After the meal, Garrett surprised them all by announcing he was taking the afternoon off. "Thought we might ride out to Lookout Point," he suggested. "Give Miss Evans a proper view of the territory before she leaves." The children brightened immediately at the prospect of an adventure, racing to change into riding clothes. Katherine hesitated, torn between wanting to spend these last hours with them and the painful awareness that doing so would only make tomorrow's departure harder. "You don't have to come if you'd prefer not to," Garrett said quietly when they were alone. "I know goodbyes can be difficult." "They're already attached to me," Katherine admitted. "Perhaps it would be kinder to begin the separation now." Garrett studied her face for a moment. "Maybe. But they'll remember this day for years to come. Might be worth a little extra heartache to give them that memory." Put that way, Katherine couldn't refuse. An hour later, they set out from the ranch, Katherine and the girls riding gentle mares, while Garrett and Samuel rode their respective geldings. They followed a winding trail that climbed steadily upward through stands of pine and aspen, the ground still damp from the previous night's rain. "How far is Lookout Point?" Katherine asked as they paused to rest the horses at a small clearing. "Another mile or so," Garrett replied, helping Emma adjust her saddle. "It's worth the journey, I promise." He was right. When they finally emerged from the trees onto a rocky promontory, Katherine gasped at the vista that spread before them. The entire valley lay below, a patchwork of green meadows, golden fields, and the silver ribbon of Sweetwater Creek winding its way through the landscape. In the distance, the town of Sweetwater was visible, its buildings tiny against the backdrop of mountains. "That's our land," Samuel said proudly, pointing to a section of the valley, "all the way from the creek bend to the stand of cottonwoods." "It's beautiful," Katherine breathed, trying to commit the scene to memory. "This was my father's favorite spot. Garrett said, coming to stand beside her while the children explored the edge of the clearing. He'd ride up here whenever he had a difficult decision to make. Said the perspective helped him see things clearly. Katherine glanced at him. And does it help you? Sometimes, he admitted. Other times it just reminds me how much I still don't understand about this life. They stood in companionable silence for several minutes, watching as a hawk circled lazily on thermal currents rising from the valley floor. The afternoon sun was warm on their faces, the air fragrant with pine resin and wildflowers. Katherine, Garrett began hesitantly, I know you're set on returning east tomorrow and I respect your decision, but I want you to know that there would be a place for you here if you wanted it. Her heart stuttered at his words. What kind of place, Garrett? He turned to face her fully, his expression more open than she had ever seen it. Whatever kind you wanted, the children need a teacher not just for a week, but for years to come. The ranch is prospering enough that I could pay you a proper salary. You're offering me employment. Katherine clarified, unsure whether to feel disappointed or relieved. Garrett ran a hand through his hair, a gesture she had come to recognize as a sign of his discomfort. I'm offering you a home, Katherine, the rest. That would be up to us, in time. The implication of his words hung in the air between them. He wasn't proposing marriage, it would be too soon, too presumptuous, but he was acknowledging the possibility of something growing between them. I barely know you, she said softly. I know, he acknowledged. And you're still grieving James. I'm not asking for promises, Katherine, just consideration. Before she could respond, Emma came running up, breaking the moment. Uncle Garrett, Samuel says he can see a bear, but I think he's fibbing. Garrett's expression shifted seamlessly from vulnerable to playfully stern. Well, let's go see what your brother's spotted, shall we? As he allowed himself to be dragged away by his niece, Garrett cast one last glance at Katherine, his eyes conveying what words had not, that the choice was hers, without pressure or expectation. Katherine remained at the edge of the promontory, her thoughts as vast and complex as the landscape before her. The practical part of her mind cataloged the reasons to return east: the security of a position at a respected academy, the familiarity of Boston society, the comfort of known surroundings during her ongoing grief. But her heart, which had been so numb since James's death, now pulsed with new sensations: the warmth she felt watching Garrett with his nieces and nephew, the peace that had begun to replace her raw pain during her stay at the ranch, and the undeniable connection she felt to this man who had knelt beside her in church just days ago. Was it merely gratitude she felt, or rebound attraction, her vulnerable heart seeking any port in the storm of grief? Or was it something more authentic, the recognition of a kindred spirit, someone who understood loss but had found the strength to rebuild? The stage would arrive tomorrow. She had until then to decide. The ride back to the ranch was quieter, everyone lost in their own thoughts as the sun began its descent toward the western peaks. When they arrived, Mrs. Potter had dinner waiting, a special meal for Katherine's last night with apple pie for dessert. It was my mother's recipe, she explained as she served generous slices. Seemed fitting for a farewell dinner. Dinner conversation was subdued, with occasional forced cheerfulness from the adults for the children's benefit. Afterward, as Katherine helped clear the table, Abigail approached her with a folded paper. We made this for you, the girl said, presenting it with solemn dignity, so you won't forget us. Katherine unfolded the paper to find a carefully drawn picture of the rocking sea, with 5 figures standing in front of the house: the 3 children, Garrett, and a woman who was clearly meant to be Katherine. It's beautiful, she said, genuine emotion making her voice unsteady. Thank you, Abigail, I'll treasure it always. Will you write to us from Boston? Samuel asked, trying to sound casual though his concern was evident. Of course I will, Katherine promised, and I expect letters in return detailing all your progress with your studies. Once the children had been put to bed after extended goodnight hugs and multiple requests for extra stories, Katherine found herself alone in the parlor, staring at the children's drawing. They had included her in their family portrait as if she belonged there, as if her place among them was natural and permanent. Footsteps in the doorway made her look up. Garrett stood there, 2 cups of coffee in his hands. "Thought you might want this," he said, offering one to her. "It's a long journey tomorrow. You'll need your rest." "Thank you," she said, accepting the cup. Their fingers brushed in the exchange, sending a small shock through her system. Garrett took a seat in the armchair opposite her, his gaze falling on the drawing in her lap. "The children will miss you terribly." "And I them," she admitted. "They're remarkable children. You and your sister should be proud." "We are." He hesitated, then added, "Katherine, about what I said earlier today." "You don't need to explain," she interrupted gently. "It was a kind offer." "It wasn't kindness," Garrett said, his voice low but firm. "At least, not entirely." Katherine set her coffee cup aside, her heart beating faster. "What was it then?" "Selfishness, perhaps," he admitted with a small, self-deprecating smile. "I've enjoyed having you here not just for the children's sake, but for my own. It's been easier somehow. The days seem brighter." "Garrett," she began, not sure what she intended to say. He raised a hand to stop her. "I know it's too soon for both of us. Grief isn't something that disappears overnight, but I also know that when you leave tomorrow, this house will feel emptier than it did before you came." The raw honesty in his voice moved her deeply. Here was a man who had known profound loss, yet remained open to the possibility of new connections, new beginnings. "Could she be as brave? I've been thinking about your offer," she said carefully. "About staying." Hope flickered briefly in his eyes before he controlled it. "And I'm not sure it would be wise," she admitted. "My emotions are still unsettled. I wouldn't want to make a decision I might regret or that might hurt you or the children." Garrett nodded, accepting her reasoning without protest. "I understand. Your stage leaves at noon tomorrow. Whatever you decide, know that you've brought something special to the rocking sea these past days." He rose, clearly intending to give her space to think. As he passed her chair, Katherine reached out impulsively and caught his hand. The contact seemed to surprise them both. "Thank you," she said quietly, "for everything." His fingers tightened briefly around hers. "Sleep well, Katherine." After he left, Katherine remained in the parlor for a long time, listening to the settling sounds of the house and the distant chorus of night insects outside. The gold band hung heavy around her neck, a physical reminder of promises made and futures lost. With a sudden decision, she removed the chain, holding the ring in her palm. James had been a good man, with dreams and ambitions that had included her. His death had been a tragedy, cutting short a life of potential and leaving her adrift in a territory far from home. But perhaps the greatest tragedy would be allowing grief to close her heart permanently to return to Boston and the safety of familiar routines, rather than embracing the unexpected path that had opened before her. Katherine slipped the ring back onto its chain and returned it to her neck. She wasn't ready to set aside her memories of James entirely, but perhaps she could carry them with her while still moving forward into a future she hadn't planned but might grow to cherish. The stage was due at noon, but Katherine was awake and dressed by dawn. She had packed her small valise the night before, setting aside the gifts she had received from the children and Mrs. Potter. Now she sat on the edge of her bed, watching the sunrise paint the distant mountains in shades of gold and rose. A soft knock at her door roused her from contemplation. "Yes." "It's Mrs. Potter, dear. May I come in?" Katherine opened the door to find the housekeeper holding a steaming cup of coffee. "I thought you might need this early start," the older woman said, entering the room. Her gaze fell on the packed valise. "So you've decided then?" "Yes," Katherine replied, accepting the coffee gratefully. "I believe I have." Mrs. Potter nodded, a knowing look in her eyes. "Well, breakfast will be ready when you come down. The children are already up, couldn't sleep for thinking about your departure." The knowledge that her decision would affect so many others weighed heavily on Katherine as she followed Mrs. Potter downstairs. The kitchen was unusually quiet, despite the presence of all 3 children, their usual morning exuberance dampened by the impending goodbye. "Good morning," Katherine greeted them, trying to inject cheerfulness into her voice. "What a beautiful day it is." Emma looked up from her barely touched porridge. "It's not beautiful, it's a sad day." "Emma," Garrett admonished gently from his place at the head of the table. "We agreed to make Miss Evans's last morning pleasant. Remember?" The little girl nodded reluctantly. "I remember, but I don't have to like it." Catherine's heart twisted at the child's honest distress. "Where I come from, Emma, we have a saying, don't cry because it's over, smile because it happened. I've so enjoyed my time with all of you." Breakfast proceeded with forced conversation, everyone trying to maintain the pretense of normalcy. When the meal was finished, Catherine excused herself to complete her preparations, aware of the children's solemn gazes following her from the room. In her bedroom, she took one last look around at the simple, comfortable space that had been her home for the past week. It seemed impossible that she had been here such a short time. The connection she felt to this place and its inhabitants ran deeper than she would have thought possible. A knock at the door interrupted her reflections. Catherine opened it to find Garrett standing there, his expression carefully neutral. "The wagon is ready whenever you are," he said. "I'll drive you into town for the stage." "Thank you," she replied. "I'll be down in a moment." He lingered briefly, as if wanting to say more, but then nodded and turned away. Catherine watched him go, noting the tension in his shoulders and the controlled precision of his movements, a man holding himself carefully in check. Downstairs, the goodbyes were as difficult as she had anticipated. Mrs. Potter hugged her warmly, pressing a small package into her hands. "Biscuits for your journey," she explained, "and a recipe card inside should you ever want to make them yourself." The children were less restrained in their emotions. Emma clung to her skirts, sobbing openly. Samuel tried to maintain a stoic facade that crumbled when Catherine hugged him. Abigail, mature beyond her years, presented Catherine with a pressed wildflower bookmark. "So you'll think of Colorado when you're reading in Boston," the girl explained, her voice steady despite the tears in her eyes. Finally, there was nothing left but to walk out to the waiting wagon. Garrett helped Catherine up onto the seat, his hand strong and warm around hers. The physical contact sent a now familiar flutter through her chest. He climbed up beside her, took up the reins, and with a gentle click of his tongue, set the horses in motion. They had traveled perhaps a quarter-mile down the drive when Catherine spoke. "Garrett, could you stop the wagon for a moment, please?" He pulled the horses to a halt, turning to her with a question in his eyes. "Is something wrong?" Catherine took a deep breath. "I need to tell you something before we reach town, something important." Garrett set the brake and turned to face her fully, his expression guarded but attentive. "I'm listening. When I arrived in Sweetwater, I was certain my life was over, not literally, but in all the ways that mattered," she began. "James was gone, and with him all my plans for the future." "That's understandable," Garrett said quietly. "But this past week has shown me something I didn't expect," Catherine continued. "That perhaps endings can also be beginnings if we're brave enough to recognize them as such." Hope began to dawn in Garrett's eyes, but he remained silent, waiting for her to finish. "I've decided not to take the stage today," she said finally. "If your offer still stands, I'd like to stay at the Rocking Sea as the children's teacher to start with. As for the rest, I think we both need time." The smile that transformed Garrett's face was like sunrise breaking over the mountains, gradual at first, then radiantly full. "The offer absolutely still stands," he assured her, "for as long as you want it." Relief and something like joy washed through Catherine. "I can't promise what the future might hold," she cautioned. "I'm still healing." "So am I," Garrett acknowledged. "We'll take it one day at a time." He reached across the space between them, his hand palm up in invitation. After only a moment's hesitation, Catherine placed her hand in his. Their fingers interlaced naturally, as if they had been doing this simple act of connection for years. "Shall we go back and tell the children?" he suggested, his voice warm with suppressed emotion. "They'll be overjoyed." Catherine nodded, suddenly eager to see their reactions. "Yes, let's go home." Garrett's hand tightened on hers at the word home, but he made no comment on her choice of phrasing. Instead, he released the brake and turned the wagon around, heading back toward the ranch house where 3 children and a housekeeper would soon be receiving unexpected but welcome news. As they approached the house, Catherine saw the children standing on the porch, clearly having been watching the road since their departure. Emma was the first to notice the returning wagon, her small face registering confusion that quickly transformed into hope. "They're coming back." She shrieked, bouncing up and down with excitement. Miss Evans is coming back. By the time Garrett brought the wagon to a halt before the house, all three children were racing toward them, their earlier sorrow forgotten in the rush of new possibility. Mrs. Potter appeared in the doorway, a knowing smile on her face as if she had expected this outcome all along. "Does this mean you're staying?" Samuel demanded as Garrett helped Catherine down from the wagon. Catherine knelt to bring herself to the children's level. "Yes, I'm staying. I've decided to continue as your teacher if you'll have me, that is." "Forever and ever?" Emma asked, her eyes wide with hope. Catherine glanced up at Garrett, who was watching the scene with undisguised happiness. "For as long as I'm needed," she amended gently. "That's forever," Abigail stated with the certainty of youth, "because we'll always need a teacher." "And an aunt," Emma added matter-of-factly, causing both adults to flush with embarrassment and the older children to giggle. "Emma," Garrett admonished, though his tone held more amusement than censure. "Miss Evans has agreed to be your teacher. The rest is not for little girls to speculate about." "But Mama said," Emma began. "I think we should let Miss Evans get settled again, Mrs. Potter interrupted smoothly, coming down the porch steps. "Children, come help me prepare a special lunch to celebrate." As the children followed Mrs. Potter inside, their excited chatter drifting back, Catherine found herself alone with Garrett in the yard. The morning sun was warm on her face, the scent of pine and sage carried on a gentle breeze. "Are you sure about this?" Garrett asked quietly. "It's not too late to change your mind." Catherine considered the question seriously. Was she sure? Her grief for James was still present, a dull ache rather than the sharp pain of recent days. Her future, once so clearly defined, now stretched before her as an unwritten page. There were no guarantees that this new path would lead to happiness. But as she looked at Garrett, at the patience in his eyes and the tentative hope in his smile, she felt more certain than she had since arriving in Colorado territory. "I'm sure," she said simply. "This feels right, in a way that returning to Boston doesn't." Relief and joy mingled in Garrett's expression. "Then welcome home, Katherine Evans." The word home resonated within her, filling spaces that had been empty since James's death, perhaps even before that, if she was truly honest with herself. The rocking sea, with its simple beauty and the family that inhabited it, had begun to heal something in her that she hadn't realized was broken. "Thank you," she said softly, "for finding me in that church, for not letting me kneel alone." Garrett's expression grew serious. "I know what it is to face grief without support. I wouldn't wish that on anyone, least of all someone with your spirit." "My spirit was pretty broken that day," Catherine reminded him. "Bent, perhaps," he corrected gently. "Not broken. I could see the strength in you even then, beneath the sorrow." His perception touched her deeply. "You saw more clearly than I did." "Sometimes it takes another person's eyes to help us see ourselves truly," Garrett said. He hesitated, then added, "Catherine, I want you to know that I have no expectations beyond what you're comfortable with. If friendship is all you ever want from me, that will be enough." The sincerity in his voice moved her. Here was a man who had known profound loss, yet remained capable of selfless love for his nieces and nephew, for the land he tended, and perhaps in time for her. "I don't know what the future holds for us, Garrett," she admitted honestly, "but I'd like to find out day by day." His smile returned, warming her from within. "Day by day sounds perfect." A shout from the house drew their attention. Samuel, calling them to come see the special cake Mrs. Potter was making to celebrate Catherine's decision to stay. The moment of private connection ended, but the understanding between them remained, a foundation upon which something new might gradually be built. As they walked together toward the house, Catherine felt James's ring against her skin, beneath her dress. It would always be part of her, a reminder of what she had loved and lost, but it no longer felt like a chain binding her to grief. Instead, it had become a touchstone, a reminder that she had once been capable of deep love, and might be again, when the time was right. The weeks that followed took on a rhythm and purpose that brought Catherine increasing contentment. Mornings were devoted to lessons with the children, while afternoons often found her assisting Mrs. Potter with household tasks or accompanying Garrett on rides around the property, learning the geography and history of the land she now called home. Each evening, after the children were in bed, She and Garrett would often sit on the front porch, watching the sunset and talking about everything and nothing his childhood on the ranch. Her years in Boston, books they had read, dreams they had harbored. These conversations, casual yet intimate, wove threads of connection between them that grew stronger with each passing day. A month after her decision to stay, Katherine received a letter from the Girls' Academy in Boston, inquiring about her delayed arrival. She sat at Garrett's desk that evening, composing a response that officially resigned her position. As she sealed the envelope, she felt a curious mixture of emotions, a twinge of regret for the path not taken, but overwhelmingly, a sense of rightness about the choice she had made. "Difficult letter to write?" Garrett asked from the doorway, observing her pensive expression. "Not as difficult as I expected," Katherine admitted. "It feels like closing a door, but not in a sad way." He nodded, understanding without needing further explanation. "Sam mentioned you were teaching them about the constellations tomorrow night. Thought you might like to use this." He placed a small brass telescope on the desk. "It was my father's, not powerful as scientific instruments go, but good enough to see Saturn's rings on a clear night." "The children will be thrilled," Katherine said, running her fingers over the polished brass. "Thank you for thinking of it." "Actually, I was thinking of you," Garrett admitted with a small smile. "How your face lights up when you're teaching them something new, it's beautiful to see." The compliment brought color to her cheeks. Their relationship had remained carefully proper, with only occasional touches, a hand helping her into the wagon, fingers brushing while passing a book. Yet beneath the propriety, Katherine was increasingly aware of a deeper current of attraction, one that both excited and frightened her. "Garrett," she began hesitantly, "I've been meaning to ask you something." He leaned against the doorframe, giving her his full attention. "Ask away." "The townspeople, what must they think of this arrangement? An unmarried woman living in your home, even with Mrs. Potter as chaperone." A furrow appeared between his brows. "Has someone said something to upset you?" "No," she hastened to assure him. "Everyone has been perfectly cordial when we've gone into town, but I wonder if they speculate." "People will always talk," Garrett said with a shrug. "But anyone who matters understands that you're here as the children's teacher, not as anything improper." "And if someday our relationship were to change?" Katherine asked, her heart racing at her own boldness. "What then?" The question hung in the air between them, weighted with possibility. Garrett straightened, his expression suddenly serious. "Then I would do everything properly," he said quietly, "including speaking with Reverend Thomas and publishing bans, if that's what you wanted." The explicit acknowledgement of where their growing attachment might lead both thrilled and overwhelmed Katherine. "I'm not ready for that," she confessed. "Not yet, I know," Garrett assured her. "Neither am I, truth be told, we both need more time." "But someday," she found herself asking, his smile returned, gentle and without pressure. "Someday, when we're both ready, I'd be honored to ask that question formally. Until then, Katherine, I'm content with what we have now: friendship, mutual respect, and the pleasure of watching you bloom here at the rocking sea." His words eased the uncertainty that had prompted her question. There was no rush, no expectation, only the natural unfolding of whatever might grow between them in its own time. "Thank you," she said simply, "for understanding. We've both learned patience the hard way," he replied. "Some things shouldn't be hurried." As summer deepened into fall, the ranch's routine shifted to accommodate the changing seasons. Harvest kept everyone busy, with even the children helping to gather and preserve the garden's bounty. Katherine found unexpected satisfaction in these practical tasks: canning tomatoes, drying herbs, preparing for the winter months ahead. One crisp October morning, a letter arrived from Denver bearing Martha's handwriting. Garrett read it at the breakfast table, his expression growing somber. "Father has taken a turn for the worse," he announced to the waiting family. "Martha doesn't think he'll last the winter." The children's faces fell at news of their grandfather's decline. Though they had seen him infrequently due to the distance and his poor health, he remained an important figure in their lives. "Will we go to Denver?" Abigail asked. Garrett nodded slowly. "I think we must. Your mother needs support, and you should have the chance to say goodbye." "When will we leave?" Samuel wanted to know. "Tomorrow, if we can be ready," Garrett decided. It's a 3-day journey if the weather holds. Catherine's heart sank at the thought of being separated from them all, but she understood the necessity. I'll help the children pack their things, she offered. Garrett looked at her thoughtfully. I was hoping you would come with us, Catherine. Surprise rendered her momentarily speechless. Me, but I'm not family. You're important to the children, he said, and to me. Besides, Martha has written several times asking to meet the woman who's had such an impact on her family. The idea of meeting Garrett's sister, the mother of the children she had grown to love, filled Catherine with nervous anticipation. Would Martha approve of her presence in her children's lives? Or would she see Catherine as an interloper? Of course I'll come, she said finally. If you're certain I won't be intruding. You won't be, Garrett assured her. Martha specifically mentioned hoping you would accompany us. The following morning saw them departing before dawn, the ranch left in the capable hands of Mrs. Potter and the foreman. They traveled in the large wagon, made comfortable with blankets and pillows for the children. Catherine sat beside Garrett on the driver's seat, watching as the familiar landscape of the rocking sea receded behind them. Have you been to Denver often? She asked, as the first rays of sunlight painted the eastern sky. A few times a year for supplies we can't get in Sweetwater, Garrett replied. It's growing rapidly, not Boston, certainly, but impressive for a western city. The journey was long but not unpleasant. The children's excitement about visiting their mother tempered the solemnity of the purpose for their trip. They stayed at roadside inns along the way, where Catherine was introduced as the children's teacher, a designation that was technically accurate, but felt increasingly inadequate to describe her role in their lives. Denver, when they finally arrived, proved to be a bustling city of brick buildings and wooden sidewalks, with carriages and wagons creating a constant flow of traffic along its main thoroughfares. Catherine found herself both overwhelmed by the relative civilization after months at the ranch, and struck by how small it still seemed compared to Boston. Martha Thornton's home was a modest, but well-maintained 2-story near the edge of town. As their wagon approached, the front door opened, and a woman who bore a striking resemblance to Garrett emerged onto the porch. The children cried out in delight, scrambling from the wagon almost before it had stopped. Catherine watched the joyful reunion between mother and children with a bittersweet pang. For all that she had come to care for Abigail, Samuel, and Emma, she was not their mother. That bond belonged to the slender, dark-haired woman who now knelt embracing them, tears of happiness streaming down her face. Garrett helped Catherine down from the wagon, his hand lingering supportively at her elbow, as if sensing her sudden uncertainty. Martha, he called as they approached the porch, I'd like you to meet Katherine Evans. Martha straightened, her tear-streaked face breaking into a warm smile as she extended her hand. Miss Evans, at last. I've heard so much about you from both my brother and my children that I feel I know you already. Catherine took the offered hand, immediately put at ease by Martha's genuine warmth. I've been looking forward to meeting you as well. Your children are a joy to teach. And apparently better behaved for you than they ever were for me, Martha laughed. Come inside, all of you. Father is resting, but he'll want to see the children when he wakes. The interior of Martha's home reflected her practical but refined sensibilities, simpler than Eastern standards, but comfortable and tasteful. A tall, graying man rose from an armchair as they entered, introducing himself as Dr. James Wilson, Martha's neighbor and her father's physician. And more than a neighbor, if Martha would finally accept my proposal, he added with good-natured exasperation that suggested this was a long-standing discussion between them. James, Martha chided gently, though her expression softened when she looked at him. Not in front of the children. They know I intend to marry you eventually, Dr. Wilson replied unrepentantly. I've made no secret of it. Catherine glanced at Garrett, surprised to find him smiling at the exchange. The good doctor has been pursuing my stubborn sister for nearly a year, he explained in an undertone. She keeps refusing him because she won't leave father while he needs her. A devoted daughter, Catherine observed. Yes, Garrett agreed, but I hope once father passes she'll finally allow herself some happiness. Wilson's a good man, he'd make her a fine husband. There was something in his tone that suggested he was thinking beyond his sister's situation. But before Katherine could parse his meaning, Martha was showing them to their rooms, the children to a shared chamber, Garrett to a small guest room, and Katherine to what appeared to be Martha's own bedroom. "I couldn't possibly displace you," Katherine protested when she realized the arrangement. "Nonsense," Martha replied firmly. "I've been sleeping in the chair beside Father's bed most nights anyway. You'll be doing me a favor by ensuring the room gets used." That evening, after a simple but hearty dinner, the children were permitted a brief visit with their grandfather. Katherine remained downstairs with Garrett, Martha, and Dr. Wilson, giving the family privacy for what might be their final moments together. "Miss Evans, Doctor." Wilson addressed her as they sat in Martha's small parlor. "Garrett tells me you're originally from Boston. What brought you to Colorado territory?" Katherine hesitated, glancing at Garrett. They had never concealed the circumstances of their meeting, but she was uncertain how much Martha knew. "Katherine came west to marry," Garrett supplied, his voice gentle. "Her fiancé worked at the Silver Creek mine. There was an accident shortly before their wedding." "Oh, my dear," Martha exclaimed, reaching over to clasp Katherine's hand. "How terrible for you it was," Katherine acknowledged. "For a time I thought I would return east immediately, but then—" Her eyes met Garrett's across the room. "Your brother offered me a position teaching the children. It gave me purpose when I needed it most." "And now," Dr. Wilson asked perceptively, "is teaching all that keeps you in Colorado?" The directness of the question might have offended Katherine from someone less genuinely interested in her welfare. As it was, she felt her cheeks warm as she considered her answer. "I've come to love Sweetwater Creek," she said carefully. "The landscape, the people, the sense of community. It feels more like home now than Boston does." Martha's gaze moved between Katherine and her brother, a knowing smile playing at the corners of her mouth. "The children write of nothing but Miss Evans this and Miss Evans that in their letters. I began to wonder what manner of paragon my brother had installed in my absence." "Hardly a paragon," Katherine demurred, embarrassed by the attention. "I disagree," Garrett said quietly. "The children have flourished under your care, Katherine, we all have." The simple statement, delivered with such sincerity, sent a wave of emotion through Katherine. They had never spoken so openly of their feelings in front of others, maintaining a careful propriety that sometimes felt constraining but had seemed necessary given their situation. Martha, observing the exchange with evident satisfaction, turned to Dr. Wilson. "James, wasn't there something you wanted to show Garrett in your study, that new medical text on equine ailments, perhaps?" Dr. Wilson caught on immediately. "Indeed there was." "Garrett, if you wouldn't mind accompanying me next door for a few minutes." Once the men had departed, Martha turned her full attention to Katherine. "Now then, I believe we're overdue for a proper conversation, woman to woman." Katherine's nervousness returned. "About what exactly?" "About my brother, of course," Martha replied matter-of-factly. "And about you, and whatever is growing between you that has put the light back in his eyes." "I'm not sure what you mean," Katherine hedged, though she suspected she knew exactly what Martha was referring to. "Let me be direct then," Martha said kindly. "I love my brother dearly, but since Caroline died, he's been existing rather than living, going through the motions of life without truly participating in it. His letters these past months have been different. There's life in his words again, and hope. That change coincides precisely with your arrival at the rocking sea." Katherine looked down at her hands, uncertain how to respond. "Your brother has been very kind to me. He offered friendship when I needed it most." "And now," Martha pressed gently, "is it still only friendship between you?" The question demanded honesty. Katherine raised her eyes to Martha's, finding only genuine concern there, not judgment or suspicion. "I care for him," she admitted quietly. "More than I expected to, given how we met, but it's complicated. I'm still healing from James's death and Garrett from Caroline's loss." Martha nodded thoughtfully. "Grief takes its own time, different for each person. But Katherine, healing doesn't mean forgetting those we've lost. It means finding the strength to love again despite having known pain." "That's what frightens me," Katherine confessed. "The possibility of losing someone again." "Of course it does," Martha said with deep understanding. That's the risk we take when we open our hearts, but the alternative, never loving again, seems a far greater tragedy, doesn't it? Put so simply, Katherine couldn't disagree. The thought of returning to the emotional numbness that had engulfed her after James's death was unbearable after experiencing the renewed sense of connection she'd found with Garrett and the children. Your brother hasn't spoken of marriage, Katherine felt compelled to clarify. We've acknowledged that there might be feelings developing between us, but agreed to give ourselves time. That sounds like Garrett, cautious, responsible, unwilling to rush something important, Martha said with obvious affection. But don't wait too long, my dear. Life is uncertain, as both of you know too well. Before Katherine could respond, footsteps on the porch announced the men's return. The conversation shifted to more general topics, but Martha's words lingered in Katherine's mind long after they had retired for the evening. The next morning brought the news they had been expecting but dreading. Richard Calloway had passed quietly in his sleep. The household fell into the somber rituals of death. The children were told, tears were shed, a minister was summoned, and arrangements were made for burial in the small cemetery on the edge of town. Through it all, Katherine observed Garrett's quiet strength as he supported his sister and comforted his nieces and nephew. His grief was evident but controlled, the pain of losing his father tempered by the knowledge that the old man's suffering had ended. The funeral was held 2 days later, attended by a surprising number of Denver's citizens' testimony to Richard Calloway's standing in the community he had helped build. Katherine stood beside the children during the service, providing quiet comfort as they said goodbye to their grandfather. Garrett and Martha stood at the graveside, accepting condolences with dignified grace. As the mourners gradually departed, Katherine found herself alone by a nearby oak tree, giving the family space for their final moments together. The autumn sun filtered through branches half bare of leaves, dappling the ground with shifting patterns of light and shadow. Miss Evans, Katherine turned to find Dr. Wilson approaching, his expression kind but serious. I wanted to thank you for your support of the family these past days. It's meant a great deal to them, to all of us. They've become very dear to me, she replied simply. I'm glad I could be here. Dr. Wilson nodded, glancing toward the graveside where Garrett now stood alone, Martha having taken the children back to the house. May I speak frankly with you? Of course, Katherine said, curious about what the physician might have to say. I've known Garrett Calloway since we were boys together, Dr. Wilson began. He's as fine a man as I've ever met, honorable to his core, sometimes to his own detriment. He wouldn't press his suit if he thought you weren't ready, even if it meant denying his own feelings indefinitely. Katherine felt her cheeks warm at the directness of his observation. Dr. Wilson, I'm not sure it's appropriate. Forgive me, he interrupted gently. I don't mean to overstep. But life is short and uncertain. My profession teaches me that daily. Happiness, when found, shouldn't be postponed without good reason. He tipped his hat respectfully and moved away, leaving Katherine to consider his words. From different perspectives, both Martha and Dr. Wilson had offered essentially the same counsel, not to let fear of future pain prevent present joy. She watched as Garrett finally turned from his father's grave and began walking toward her, his tall figure silhouetted against the afternoon sun. His face, when he reached her, showed the strain of the past days, but his eyes warmed visibly upon meeting hers. Ready to head back to the house? He asked, offering his arm. Katherine took it, feeling the solid strength of him beside her. Yes, how are you holding up? I'm all right, he said after a moment's consideration. Sad, of course, but father lived a good, long life. No man could ask for more. They walked in companionable silence for several paces before Garrett spoke again. Martha has decided to return to the rocking sea with us. Katherine glanced at him in surprise. For a visit, permanently, he clarified. Now that father's gone, she sees no reason to remain in Denver. She misses the children, and the ranch is as much her home as it is mine. That's wonderful news, Katherine said sincerely, though a small flutter of uncertainty arose within her. The children will be overjoyed to have their mother back. Garrett seemed to sense her unspoken question. Nothing will change regarding your position, Katherine. The children still need a teacher, and Martha has no desire to take over that role. I wasn't worried, she assured him, though in truth, she had wondered how Martha's return might affect the delicate balance they had established at the ranch. There's something else, Garrett continued, slowing their pace. Dr. Wilson has proposed to Martha again, and this time she's accepted. They'll be married in the spring. That's wonderful, Katherine repeated, genuinely pleased for the woman who had shown her such kindness. Will he join you at the rocking sea as well? Garrett shook his head. He'll maintain his practice here in Denver, but plans to visit frequently. Eventually, they hope to build a small house on the northern section of our land, where he can establish a country practice while still making trips to the city when needed. The news settled Katherine's uncertainty somewhat. Martha's return wouldn't mean a complete disruption of the life they had built over the past months. Still, changes were coming, natural, inevitable changes that would require adjustments from all of them. Life moves forward, she mused aloud. Garrett looked down at her, his expression thoughtful. Yes, it does, sometimes in ways we don't expect. They had reached Martha's house, where sounds of activity within suggested preparations for the gathering of friends and neighbors that traditionally followed a funeral. Before they entered, Garrett paused, turning to face Katherine fully. When we return home, he said quietly, there's something important I'd like to discuss with you, something I've been considering for some time. Katherine's heart quickened at the seriousness in his tone. What is it? He shook his head slightly. Not here, not now. After we've laid Father to rest properly and returned to the rocking sea, will you grant me that conversation? Of course, she agreed, curiosity mingling with a nervous anticipation. Could he be thinking of proposing? The possibility both thrilled and frightened her. Garrett's smile was gentle, as if he could read her thoughts. No pressure, Katherine. Whatever happens, it will be what's right for both of us. With that reassurance, he led her into the house, where the first of the funeral guests were already arriving. The conversation he had requested would have to wait, but Katherine found herself counting the days until they would return to Sweetwater Creek, and whatever future awaited them there. The journey back to the rocking sea took longer than their trip to Denver, the weather having turned colder with the threat of early snow in the mountains. Martha's presence changed the dynamic of their traveling party, bringing a maternal warmth that the children clearly thrived on while creating a different, more formal relationship between Katherine and Garrett. No longer were they the default parental figures. That role naturally reverted to Martha with her return. Katherine found herself watching the easy way Martha interacted with her children, noting techniques she might incorporate into her teaching and marveling at the deep bond that had remained intact despite their separation. You're very good with them, Martha commented on their final evening on the trail as they sat beside the campfire after the children had fallen asleep in the wagon. Garrett had gone to check on the horses, leaving the two women alone. They make it easy, Katherine replied. They're wonderful children. Because of your influence these past months, Martha insisted, Garrett writes that you've given them structure and purpose they were lacking. I can't thank you enough for that. It's been my pleasure, truly, Katherine said. Teaching has always been my calling, but with them, it's become something more, a genuine joy. Martha studied her face in the flickering firelight. And my brother, has he been a joy as well? The direct question brought color to Katherine's cheeks. Martha. Forgive me, the other woman said, though she didn't look particularly repentant. It's just that I've never seen Garrett look at anyone the way he looks at you, not even Caroline, God rest her soul. This revelation startled Katherine. Surely that can't be true. He loved his wife deeply. Of course he did, Martha agreed. But they were young when they married, still growing into themselves. What Garrett feels for you comes from a deeper place, from the man he's become through loss and responsibility. It's a more mature love, grounded in genuine understanding. Katherine was silent for a moment, processing Martha's words. He mentioned wanting to speak with me when we return to the ranch, she finally admitted. I think he may intend to propose. And if he does, Martha prompted gently, what will you answer? I don't know, Katherine confessed. Part of me feels it's too soon. We've known each other less than a year, but another part recognizes a true partner when you find one, Martha finished for her. Time is a poor measure of compatibility, Katherine. Some people know each other for decades without truly connecting, while others recognize their match almost immediately. The sound of Garrett's approaching footsteps ended their conversation, but Martha's perspective stayed with Katherine throughout the remainder of their journey. By the time they crossed Sweetwater Creek and the familiar buildings of the rocking sea came into view, she had reached a decision about how she would respond to whatever Garrett wished to discuss. Their homecoming was joyous, with Mrs. Potter welcoming them with a hearty meal and the comfort of familiar surroundings. Martha's return necessitated some rearrangement of sleeping quarters. She would take the master bedroom that had been Garrett's, while he would move to the smaller room that had previously belonged to their father when he visited. The first few days were consumed with settling Martha back into ranch life and establishing new routines that accommodated her presence while maintaining the educational schedule Katherine had implemented for the children. Garrett was frequently absent, catching up on ranch work that had accumulated during their time away. Nearly a week passed before Katherine found herself truly alone with him. She had begun to wonder if he had forgotten or reconsidered the conversation he had requested. Then, one crisp November afternoon, he appeared at the schoolroom door after the children had been dismissed for the day. "I thought you might like to ride out to Lookout Point," he suggested, his manner casual though his eyes held an intensity that made her pulse quicken. "The aspens are at their peak color. It's quite a sight." Katherine understood immediately that this was the moment he had been waiting for, private, unhurried time away from the busy household. "I'd like that very much," she agreed, gathering her shawl. They rode in companionable silence for much of the journey, the familiar trail winding up through stands of aspen whose golden leaves trembled in the afternoon breeze. Occasionally, Garrett would point out a hawk circling overhead or a deer visible at the edge of a clearing, but neither felt compelled to fill the quiet with unnecessary conversation. When they reached Lookout Point, the view was even more spectacular than Katherine remembered. The valley below was transformed by autumn, a tapestry of gold, russet, and lingering green spread beneath a sky of perfect Colorado blue. They dismounted, leaving the horses' ground tied to graze on the sparse mountain grass. "I never tire of this view," Garrett said, standing beside her at the edge of the promontory. "Each season brings something new to appreciate." "It's beautiful," Katherine agreed. "I understand why your father came here to think." Garrett turned to face her, his expression serious but calm. "That's why I brought you here today. There's something important I want to ask you, and this seemed the right place for it." Katherine's heart began to race, though she maintained an outward composure. "I'm listening." He took both her hands in his touch warm and gentle. "Katherine, these past months have been the most meaningful of my life since Caroline died. You brought light back into our home, purpose to the children's days, and gradually, joy to my heart when I thought it might be permanently darkened by grief." "Garrett," she began, deeply moved by his words. "Please let me finish," he requested softly. "I need to say this properly." Katherine nodded, feeling tears beginning to gather in her eyes. "I know you came to us broken-hearted," he continued. "I know you're still healing, as am I. But I've come to believe that sometimes the best healing happens when two wounded hearts find each other and grow stronger together." He reached into his pocket and withdrew a small object that caught the sunlight, a gold ring set with a modest diamond flanked by two small sapphires. "This was my grandmother's," he explained. "I've kept it safe, waiting for the right moment, the right person. Katherine Evans, I love you. I think I began to love you that first day in the church when you showed such courage in your grief. Would you do me the great honor of becoming my wife?" The tears spilled over then, tracing warm paths down Katherine's cheeks. She had known this moment was coming, had prepared herself for it, yet the reality of his proposal, so heartfelt, so perfectly expressed, overwhelmed her carefully constructed composure. "Before I answer," she managed through her emotion, "there's something I need to show you." Garrett looked puzzled but waited patiently as Katherine reached beneath the collar of her dress and withdrew the chain. She still wore the one that held James's wedding band. "I've carried this since the day I learned of James's death," she explained, holding it between them. At first, it was all I had left of him, of the future we had planned. I couldn't imagine removing it because doing so felt like accepting he was truly gone. Garrett's expression remained open without a trace of jealousy or discomfort. "I understand," he said simply. "But recently I've realized something," Katherine continued. "Carrying this ring doesn't keep James with me, my memories do that. And those memories, precious as they are, belong to my past. They're part of what shaped me into the woman I am today, but they aren't my future." With deliberate movements, she unclasped the chain and removed the ring from it, then reached for Garrett's hand and placed the band in his palm, closing his fingers over it. "I'll always honor what James and I meant to each other," she said. "But my heart has found its true home here, with you and the children. Yes, Garrett Calloway, I will marry you with all the love and commitment I possess." The joy that transformed his face was like sunrise breaking over the mountains. He slipped his grandmother's ring onto Catherine's finger, a perfect fit, as if it had been made for her, then drew her into his arms with gentle reverence. "I promise you won't regret this," he murmured against her hair. "I'll spend every day trying to be worthy of the trust you've placed in me." "We'll be worthy of each other," Katherine corrected, leaning back to look into his eyes. "Partners in all things, helping each other grow and heal." His smile was tender as he cradled her face in his hands. "May I kiss you, Katherine? I've wanted to since that day at the creek when you nearly drowned." "That long?" she asked, surprised and touched by the admission. "That long," he confirmed, though I tried not to acknowledge it, even to myself. "Then yes," she whispered, her heart full to bursting. "You may kiss me." His lips met hers with exquisite gentleness, a kiss that held promise rather than demand, deep affection rather than mere passion. Catherine's arms circled his neck naturally, drawing him closer as something bloomed within her, not the desperate, giddy love of youth, but something richer and more enduring. When they finally parted, both a little breathless, Garrett rested his forehead against hers. "I feel like I should pinch myself to make sure this isn't a dream," Katherine laughed softly. "If it is, then we're sharing the same one." They stood together for several minutes, savoring the moment and the breathtaking view spread before them, a vista that now seemed to symbolize their future together, vast with possibility and beauty. "We should head back," Garrett said eventually. "The family will be wondering where we've gone." "Martha won't be wondering," Katherine replied with a smile. "She'll know exactly what you had in mind bringing me up here," Garrett chuckled. "My sister has never been one for subtlety. She's been asking me daily when I plan to make an honest woman of you, as she puts it." "And Mrs. Potter," Katherine added. "She's been leaving bridal magazines from Denver conspicuously around the house." "Are we that transparent?" Garrett asked, helping her mount her horse. "Apparently to everyone except ourselves," Katherine replied. "We seem to have been the last to recognize what was happening between us." The ride back to the ranch was filled with comfortable conversation and occasional comfortable silences, their shared future stretching before them like the golden valley below. As they approached the house, Katherine saw the children playing in the yard while Martha and Mrs. Potter sat on the porch, apparently deep in conversation. Emma was the first to spot them, running to meet their horses with her usual enthusiasm. "Uncle Garrett, Miss Evans, look what I found." She held up a perfectly formed pine cone for their inspection. Garrett dismounted quickly, then lifted Katherine down from her horse with hands that lingered perhaps a moment longer than strictly necessary. The brief contact sent a pleasant shiver through her, a physical reminder of their new relationship. "That's a fine specimen, Emma," Garrett praised, examining the pine cone with appropriate seriousness. "Just right for the collection you're starting." The little girl beamed at his approval, then her gaze fell on Catherine's left hand where the ring now sparkled in the late afternoon sun. Her eyes widened comically. "Is that a wedding ring?" she demanded loudly enough for everyone in the yard to hear. "Are you going to marry Uncle Garrett?" Katherine felt a blush rise to her cheeks as all activity in the yard ceased, every eye turning toward them. Garrett cleared his throat, taking her hand in his. "Yes, Emma," he confirmed, his voice carrying clearly. "Miss Evans has done me the great honor of agreeing to become my wife." For a moment, silence reigned. Then pandemonium erupted as the children rushed forward with excited exclamations. Martha and Mrs. Potter hurried from the porch with cries of delight, and even the ranch hands who had been working nearby approached to offer congratulations. "I knew it," Emma declared triumphantly. "I told you he needed a wife, didn't I, Mama?" "Emma," Martha admonished, though her smile belied any real censure. "Mind your manners." But the little girl was undeterred. "Does this mean we can call you Aunt Catherine now?" she asked, looking up at Catherine with hopeful eyes. Catherine glanced at Garrett, who nodded encouragingly. "If you'd like to," she told Emma gently, "I would be honored." "When will the wedding be?" Abigail wanted to know, practical as always. "We haven't discussed the details yet," Garrett admitted, "but I don't see any reason to wait too long. Perhaps after the spring roundup. April then," Martha suggested. "The weather should be fair by then and the wildflowers will be starting to bloom. We could hold the ceremony right here at the ranch." Catherine found herself swept along in the excitement, the reality of her engagement beginning to sink in as the family discussed possible dates, necessary preparations, and who should be invited. Through it all, Garrett remained at her side, his steady presence an anchor amid the whirlwind of planning that had spontaneously erupted. Later that evening, after a celebratory dinner, and once the children had been put to bed with extra stories and reassurances that yes, Catherine would still be their teacher even after becoming their aunt, she found herself alone with Garrett on the front porch. The night was clear and cold, the stars brilliant in the black velvet sky. "Are you happy?" he asked quietly, his arm around her shoulders as they sat on the porch swing. Catherine leaned into his warmth, contemplating the question. "Yes," she said simply. "More than I thought possible when I arrived in Sweetwater. Any regrets?" His tone was light, but she sensed a genuine question beneath it. "None," she assured him, "though I admit it all feels a bit overwhelming. There's so much to consider: the wedding, where we'll live afterward, what this means for my role with the children." Garrett's arm tightened reassuringly around her. "We'll figure it all out together. As for living arrangements, I thought we might build in addition to the main house a private suite for us while Martha and the children remain in their current rooms. Unless you'd prefer something else." The thoughtfulness of his consideration touched her deeply. "That sounds perfect," she said. "I wouldn't want to be separated from the children or from Martha. She's become a dear friend." "She thinks the world of you," Garrett told her, said she couldn't have chosen a better sister-in-law if she'd tried. They fell silent for a while, content in each other's company as they contemplated the life they would build together. The gold band that had once been James's ring now rested in a small box in Catherine's dresser drawer, not forgotten, but no longer a talisman of grief carried close to her heart. In its place, Garrett's grandmother's ring caught the lamplight from the window, a symbol of new beginnings and promises yet to be fulfilled. "Do you remember what you said to me that first day in the church?" Catherine asked softly. "You're not kneeling alone anymore." I had no idea then how prophetic those words would be. Garrett turned to look at her, his expression tender in the dim light. "I only knew that I couldn't bear to see you suffering by yourself. I never imagined where that simple act of compassion would lead us." "Perhaps that's how the best love stories begin," Catherine suggested. "Not with grand gestures or passionate declarations, but with small kindnesses offered without expectation of return. Then ours is already among the best," Garrett said, pressing a gentle kiss to her forehead. "And we're only just beginning." As if to emphasize his point, a shooting star blazed across the night sky above them, brief, brilliant, and beautiful. Catherine made a silent wish upon it, not for anything she lacked, but in gratitude for everything she had found in this man and this place that had unexpectedly become her home. The months leading to their April wedding passed in a blur of preparation and anticipation. Winter settled over the rocking sea, transforming the landscape with a blanket of pristine snow. Catherine continued teaching the children, while also learning more about ranch operations from Garrett and domestic management from Martha and Mrs. Potter. Christmas brought Dr. Wilson from Denver for an extended visit, his obvious devotion to Martha warming Catherine's heart. The holiday was celebrated with simple but meaningful traditions: a tree cut from the North Ridge and decorated with homemade ornaments. carols around the piano Martha had brought from Denver, and thoughtfully chosen gifts exchanged by firelight on Christmas Eve. Katherine received a leather-bound journal from Garrett, its cover embossed with her initials soon to change to KC. Inside, he had inscribed a quote from Elizabeth Barrett Browning, "I love you not only for what you are, but for what I am when I am with you." January and February brought the deep cold of mountain winter, days when the family remained close to the hearth, engaged in indoor pursuits while storms raged outside. Katherine used these quiet weeks to correspond with her few remaining contacts in Boston, informing them of her engagement and impending marriage. The responses were largely congratulatory, if tinged with surprise at her decision to remain permanently in what many Easterners still considered wilderness. March arrived with the first hints of spring patches of bare ground appearing in the snow, the return of birdsong to the mornings, and the beginning of construction on the addition to the main house that would become Katherine and Garrett's private quarters after their marriage. As April approached, final wedding preparations accelerated. Martha and Katherine traveled to Denver to select fabric for a wedding dress, which Mrs. Potter and the local seamstress worked together to create a gown of ivory silk with delicate lace trim, simpler than Eastern fashion but perfectly suited to a ranch wedding. Invitations were sent to neighbors and friends throughout the territory, and replies soon began arriving, expressing delight at the upcoming celebration. Dr. Wilson would serve as Garrett's best man, while Martha would stand as Katherine's matron of honor. The children would have special roles as well: Abigail as junior bridesmaid, Samuel as ring bearer, and Emma as flower girl, a responsibility the little girl took with utmost seriousness. 2 days before the wedding, Reverend Thomas arrived from Sweetwater to stay at the ranch until after the ceremony. That evening, as the family gathered for dinner, he presented Katherine with an unexpected gift. "This arrived at the church for you last week," he explained, handing her a small package bearing Boston postmarks. "I thought you might want to open it privately, but then decided it might be best delivered in the presence of your new family." Curious, Katherine unwrapped the parcel to find a small velvet box and an accompanying letter. The handwriting on the envelope was unfamiliar. Opening it, she began to read silently, her expression growing increasingly solemn. "What is it, Katherine?" Garrett asked gently, noticing her reaction. "It's from James's mother," she explained, her voice soft with surprise. "I wrote to her about our engagement, though we've had little correspondence since his death. She writes that she's happy for me and that James would have wanted me to find love again." The table fell quiet, everyone understanding the significance of this blessing from the mother of the man Katherine had once planned to marry. With slightly trembling fingers, Katherine opened the velvet box to find a pair of pearl earrings nestled inside. "They were to be her wedding gift to me," she explained, emotion making her voice unsteady. "She writes that she's kept them all this time, waiting for the right moment to send them, she says. She says she hopes I'll wear them when I marry you, Garrett, as a symbol that life continues and love endures in new forms." Garrett reached across the table to take her hand, his expression one of deep understanding. "A generous gesture from a wise woman." Katherine nodded, blinking back tears. "She's giving us her blessing. I hadn't realized how much that would mean to me until this moment." "Will you wear them?" Martha asked gently. "Yes," Katherine decided, looking at Garrett to gauge his reaction. "If you're comfortable with it." His smile was warm and without reservation. "I think it's perfect, a way of honoring your past while embracing our future." The day before the wedding dawned clear and mild, the April sun warming the land as if nature itself approved of the union about to take place. Guests began arriving throughout the day, some staying in Sweetwater and planning to ride out for the ceremony, others accommodated in the bunkhouse or neighboring ranches. Following tradition, Garrett spent the night before the wedding away from the main house, bunking with Dr. Wilson and some of his ranch hands in the foreman's cabin. Katherine, surrounded by Martha, Mrs. Potter, and the children, found herself alternating between nervous excitement and peaceful certainty as the hours ticked toward her wedding day. That night, After the children had finally been convinced to go to sleep despite their excitement, Martha joined Catherine in her room with a pot of tea and an air of someone preparing for an important conversation. "I thought you might appreciate some company," she explained, pouring 2 steaming cups. "The night before one's wedding can be filled with all manner of thoughts." Catherine accepted the tea gratefully. "I keep vacillating between absolute certainty and wondering if I'm dreaming all of this." Martha smiled knowingly. "I felt the same before I married the children's father. It's natural to question such a momentous decision even when your heart is sure." "My heart is sure," Catherine confirmed. "It's just, sometimes I wonder what my life would have been if James had lived. If I would ever have met Garrett or come to love this place as I do." "We can never know the paths not taken," Martha said wisely, "but I believe some souls are meant to connect, regardless of the circumstances. Perhaps you and Garrett would have found each other in some other way in some other time." Catherine considered this idea, finding comfort in it. "I'd like to think so." "I have something for you," Martha said, reaching into the pocket of her robe and withdrawing a small package. "A wedding gift, just from me to you." Unwrapping it, Catherine found a delicate silver bracelet with a single charm, a tiny silver church. "It's beautiful," she said, genuinely touched. "Garrett told me about how you met," Martha explained. "How he found you crying in the church and told you that you weren't kneeling alone anymore. It seemed fitting to commemorate that moment, the beginning of your journey together." Tears welled in Catherine's eyes as she fastened the bracelet around her wrist. "Thank you, Martha. Not just for this, but for welcoming me into your family so completely." "You were already part of this family before Garrett proposed," Martha assured her. "From the moment you decided to stay and teach the children, you became essential to us. Tomorrow just makes it official." The women embraced, their bond of friendship now deepening into sisterhood. When Martha finally left her to sleep, Catherine found herself too excited for immediate rest. Instead, she went to the window, looking out at the moonlit landscape of the rocking sea, the land that had become her home, the place where she had found healing and love when she least expected it. Tomorrow she would become Garrett Calloway, wife to Garrett, aunt to 3 wonderful children, sister to Martha, and mistress of this beautiful ranch. The journey that had begun in tears behind a church door would culminate in joy before an altar built especially for the occasion beneath the great oak tree in the ranch yard. Her last thought before drifting to sleep was a prayer of gratitude for second chances, for unexpected paths, and for the courage to follow where her heart led. Wedding day at the rocking sea dawned with perfect April weather, clear skies, gentle breezes, and the first wildflowers dotting the greening meadows. Catherine woke to the sound of excited voices throughout the house and the delicious aromas of Mrs. Potter's special breakfast rising from the kitchen below. Martha appeared at her door shortly after sunrise, already dressed in her matron of honor gown of soft blue silk. "Good morning, bride," she greeted with a warm smile. "Are you ready for your special day?" "More ready than I ever thought possible," Catherine replied honestly, accepting the cup of coffee Martha had brought. The morning passed in a whirl of activity: breakfast with the children, who could barely contain their excitement, a bath scented with lavender, and finally, the careful donning of her wedding gown, with Martha and Mrs. Potter assisting with buttons and adjustments. Abigail and Emma watched the proceedings with wide-eyed wonder, occasionally offering suggestions about Catherine's hair or the arrangement of her veil. "You look like a princess," Emma declared when Catherine was finally ready, the ivory silk gown flowing gracefully around her, her hair arranged in an elegant knot adorned with small white flowers from the greenhouse. "The most beautiful bride I've ever seen," Mrs. Potter agreed, her eyes suspiciously moist. The final touch was James's mother's pearl earrings, which Catherine fastened with a silent prayer of gratitude for the older woman's blessing. Martha's silver bracelet gleamed at her wrist, and around her neck, she wore a simple gold locket that had been Garrett's gift that morning. Inside, a tiny photograph of the children on one side and a lock of his hair on the other, a traditional token of affection. "It's time," Martha said softly as the clock struck 11. "Garrett and the guests are gathered under the oak. Dr. Wilson is waiting to escort me down, and Mr. Potter will give you away. Mr. Potter, Mrs. Potter's husband and the ranch foreman had offered to stand in the traditional father's role for Katherine, an offer that had touched her deeply. Now he waited at the foot of the stairs, dressed in his Sunday best, his weathered face breaking into a smile of admiration as Katherine descended. "Miss Evans," he said formally, "you do us all proud today." "Thank you, Mr. Potter," she replied, taking his offered arm. "I couldn't ask for a finer escort." The procession formed at the back door of the house, first Samuel, with the rings tied carefully to a small pillow, then Emma with her basket of spring flower petals, followed by Abigail walking with quiet dignity. Martha would go next, and finally Katherine on Mr. Potter's arm. From outside came the sound of the violin and guitar duo Garrett had hired from Denver, playing the traditional wedding march. Katherine took a deep breath, steadying herself for this moment she had dreamed of but never quite believed would come. "Ready, Miss Evans?" Mr. Potter asked quietly. "Ready, Mr. Potter," she confirmed. "And after today, it's Katherine, just Katherine." He nodded, patting her hand where it rested on his arm. "Katherine it is then. Let's not keep that fine man waiting any longer." They stepped out into the April sunshine, and Katherine's breath caught at the scene before her. The ranch yard had been transformed, wooden benches arranged in neat rows beneath the spreading oak, flowers and ribbons adorning every surface, and at the far end, a simple altar where Reverend Thomas waited with Garrett and Dr. Wilson. But it was Garrett himself who captured and held her attention. He stood tall and handsome in a new black suit, his dark hair neatly combed, his face solemn until he caught sight of her. Then his expression transformed with a joy so pure and unguarded that Katherine felt tears of happiness spring to her eyes. The walk down the improvised aisle seemed both eternal and instantaneous. Familiar faces turned to watch her progress, neighbors, friends, ranch hands, and their families, all gathered to witness this union. But Katherine saw only Garrett, her heart beating in perfect rhythm with each step that brought her closer to him. Finally, she reached the altar. Mr. Potter placed her hand in Garrett's with a formal dignity, then stepped back. Garrett's fingers closed around hers, warm and strong and reassuring. "You're breathtaking," he whispered, his voice rough with emotion. "So are you," she replied simply. Reverend Thomas began the ceremony with words about love and commitment, about the joining of two lives that had found each other against all odds. Katherine heard it as if from a distance, her focus entirely on the man before her, on the life they were about to begin together. When the time came for their vows, Garrett spoke first, his voice clear and steady despite the emotion evident in his eyes. "Katherine, when I found you that day in the church, I had no idea I was also finding my future. You came into our lives when we needed you most, bringing light and laughter back to a home that had grown too quiet. You've taught me that grief isn't the end of the story, it's just one chapter in a longer narrative that can still include joy, hope, and love." He squeezed her hands gently before continuing. "Today, I promise to walk beside you through whatever life brings us, to support your dreams, to share your burdens, to cherish your heart as the precious gift it is. I promise to be your partner in all things, your comfort in sorrow, your companion in joy, and your faithful husband for all the days we're granted together." Katherine blinked back tears as she began her own vows. "Garrett, you offered me friendship when I was a stranger, home when I was lost, and love when I thought my heart might never heal. You showed me that family isn't just about blood, but about the connections we choose to nurture and protect." Her voice grew stronger as she continued. "Today, I promise to build a life with you that honors the past while embracing our future together. I promise to love your children as my own, to respect your wisdom, to challenge you when needed, and to stand beside you through whatever storms may come. I promise to be your partner, your teacher, your student, and your faithful wife for all our days together." The exchange of rings followed simple gold bands that symbolized their endless commitment. When Reverend Thomas finally pronounced them husband and wife, Garrett's kiss was both tender and reverent, a perfect expression of the love that had grown between them over the past year. The celebration that followed lasted well into the evening, a feast prepared under Mrs. Potter's direction, music and dancing in the cleared barn, and countless toasts to the happiness of the newlyweds. As the sun began to set, casting golden light across the ranch yard, Garrett found Katherine watching the children playing with some of the neighbors' children nearby. "Happy, Mrs. Calloway?" he asked, coming to stand beside her. The new name sent a pleasant shiver through her. "Completely, Mr. Calloway," she replied, leaning into his embrace. "Though I keep expecting to wake up and find this has all been a wonderful dream." "Not a dream," he assured her, pressing a kiss to her temple. "Just the beginning of our story together." As darkness fell and lanterns were lit around the yard, creating pools of warm light in the gathering dusk, Garrett led Katherine in their first dance as husband and wife. The gathered guests formed a circle around them, watching with approval as they moved together in perfect harmony. "I love you, Katherine Calloway," Garrett murmured, for her ears alone, "more than I ever thought possible after losing Caroline." "And I love you," she replied, her heart full to bursting. "Thank you for finding me that day in the church, for not letting me kneel alone. I'll never let you face anything alone again," he promised. "Whatever comes, we'll meet it together." As the stars appeared one by one in the velvet sky above the rocking sea, Katherine knew with absolute certainty that she had found her true home not just in this beautiful place, but in the heart of the man who held her, and in the family they would nurture together through all the seasons to come. From sorrow had come joy, from loneliness had come connection, and from a chance encounter in a small church had grown a love that would sustain them through all of life's challenges and triumphs. It wasn't the future Katherine had envisioned when she first came west, but as Garrett swept her into another turn beneath the April stars, she knew it was exactly where she was meant to be.